They said he never raised his voice. Not once. Not in battle. Not in grief. Not even when the world misunderstood him. And yet, entire empires trembled at his name. History is full of loud people. People who spoke endlessly. Who shouted for attention. Who filled every silence with noise, because the silence terrified them. But then, there were the others. The ones who watched. Who waited. Who said almost nothing, and changed everything. What did they know that the rest of the world forgot? We live in a world that rewards noise. Scroll through any feed, any platform, any corner of the internet, and you'll find people competing. Not for wisdom, not for depth, but for attention. Who can be the loudest? Who can be the most outrageous? Who can say the most in the shortest amount of time, just to be seen? And somehow, we started believing that the loudest voice in the room is the most powerful one. But history, if you actually study it, tells a completely different story. The figures who shaped civilization, the ones whose names we still speak centuries later, they were almost never the loudest people in the room. They were the ones sitting quietly in the corner, observing, thinking, calculating, letting the noise of the world pass through them, like wind through stone. Silence for them wasn't emptiness. It was strategy. It was discipline. It was the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who has nothing to prove, because their work already speaks louder than any words ever could. This is the story of why legends preferred silence, and what their silence is still trying to teach us. Here's something psychology has quietly understood for a long time. The people who speak the most often know the least. Not always, but more often than you'd think. Because speaking, constant, compulsive, desperate speaking, is usually not communication. It's anxiety wearing a mask. It's the deep human fear of being alone with your own thoughts. When you are truly at peace with yourself, when your mind is focused, when your purpose is clear, you don't need to fill every silence. Silence becomes comfortable, natural, even powerful. Think about the people in your own life. The ones who talk constantly, interrupting, reacting, explaining themselves before anyone even asks. They are often the most insecure people in the room, and the person sitting quietly, listening, observing, taking everything in. That person already knows things about the room that the loud ones never will. Psychologists call this emotional regulation, the ability to experience discomfort, social pressure, conflict, uncertainty, and not react immediately, to pause, to breathe, to choose your response rather than surrender to your impulse. It sounds simple. It is incredibly rare. Silence is also a form of self-respect. When you speak carelessly, when you reveal your plans too early, when you argue with people who aren't worth your energy, when you explain yourself to those who have already decided not to understand you, you are spending something valuable. You are spending yourself. The legends understood this instinctively. Every word has weight. Every reaction is information. And the person who controls what they reveal controls the entire conversation. There's also something deeper here, something almost spiritual. The ancient Stoic philosophers believed that silence creates space, space in which wisdom can actually form. That most human error comes not from ignorance, but from speaking before thinking, reacting before understanding. In that space of silence, the greatest ideas in human history were born. Consider Isaac Newton. For 20 years, he worked almost entirely in silence. No public announcements, no desperate need to share his half-formed theories, no audience seeking his approval, just him and the questions and the quiet. And when he finally emerged from that silence, he had rewritten the laws of the universe. His contemporaries described him as cold, withdrawn, difficult to know. What they were actually describing was focus, the kind of focus that can only live in silence. Newton didn't need to talk about changing the world. He simply did it. Then there was Abraham Lincoln, a man who carried the weight of a nation tearing itself apart and was known for sitting in long, patient silences before he ever made a decision. His advisors would argue furiously. Generals would demand immediate answers. Politicians would push and pressure and shout, and Lincoln would go quiet, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he understood that the right word at the wrong moment is still the wrong word. He once wrote, "Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt." A quiet man, a careful man, and arguably the most consequential leader in American history. Across the ocean, in a completely different world, Mahatma Gandhi built a revolution on restraint. Every Monday, he observed a day of complete silence. No speaking, no responding, no explaining. His followers initially thought it was spiritual discipline, and it was, but it was also something else. Gandhi understood that words, when overused, lose their power, that when a leader speaks constantly, people stop truly listening. But when that same leader speaks rarely, every word lands like thunder. His silence made his voice more powerful, not less. And then there is Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful men who ever lived. He could have spent his reign surrounded by flattery and noise, as most emperors did. He could have declared his greatness to the world every single day. Instead, he kept a private journal, never intended for anyone else's eyes. In it, he wrote not of conquest, not of power, but of self-discipline, humility, and the constant struggle to be better. He wrote in silence, for himself, with no audience. That journal became Meditations, one of the most widely read philosophical texts in all of human history. Nikola Tesla barely slept. He barely socialized. He said almost nothing at parties, almost nothing in interviews, almost nothing about the visions burning inside his mind. While other inventors competed for headlines, Tesla disappeared into his laboratory and emerged with the future. The alternating current that powers your home right now. The wireless transmission of electricity. Ideas so far ahead of their time that the world is still catching up to them. He was described as strange, reclusive, cold. He was obsessed with the work, with the vision, with the questions that only silence could answer. And perhaps most beautifully, Bruce Lee. A man we remember for his explosiveness, his speed, his physical brilliance. But those who knew him described a man who listened far more than he spoke, who studied philosophy as deeply as he studied fighting, who once wrote, "The quieter you become, the more you are able to hear." In between the strikes and the movies and the demonstrations of power, there was a man sitting alone, reading, thinking, writing. A man who knew that true mastery begins inside the silence. Now look at where we are. A world that has never been louder. We carry devices in our pockets that give us the ability, the compulsion, to share every thought the moment it forms, every opinion, every reaction, every feeling, before we've even finished feeling it, and we've started to mistake visibility for value. We think that if people are watching us, we must be doing something important, that if our content is getting attention, it must be meaningful, that if we are loud enough, consistent enough, present enough, we will matter. But here's the truth that social media will never tell you. Attention is not the same thing as respect. Popularity is not the same thing as wisdom. A full comment section is not the same thing as a meaningful life. The deeper fear, the one that keeps people scrolling at 2 a.m., the one that makes people post just to feel something, is the fear of silence itself. Because silence forces you to sit with yourself. And for many people, that is the most uncomfortable place in the world. In the silence, the questions come. Am I living the life I actually want? Am I becoming who I truly could be? Does any of this noise actually mean anything? Those questions are terrifying. So we keep the noise going, constantly, desperately. And in doing so, we become everything the legends never were. Greatness has never needed an announcement. Think about that. The ocean does not explain itself. The mountains do not justify their height. The night sky does not ask for your permission to be infinite. True power is self-evident, and the legends understood this, not as a strategy, not as a trick, but as a way of being. When your mind is consumed by purpose, truly consumed, honestly consumed, you don't have the energy for unnecessary noise. You don't have the desire for pointless argument. You don't need validation from people who haven't even started their own journey. Silence, at its deepest level, is not the absence of something. It is the presence of everything that matters. It is focus. It is discipline. It is the long, patient accumulation of something real in a world that trades in the instant and the shallow and the loud. The legends were not quiet because they had nothing to say. They were quiet because they understood that words without depth are just noise, and the world already has enough of that. They were building something inside, quietly, slowly, something that would outlast them, something that would outlast all of us. And maybe that is the invitation here. Not to become cold, not to disappear, not to stop communicating, but to choose your words with the weight they deserve, to sit in silence long enough to hear what you actually think, not what the world has told you to think, to stop performing your life and start living it. The world will always be noisy. That will never change. There will always be another argument to have, another trend to chase, another reason to speak when you should be listening, to react when you should be still. But somewhere in the long record of human history, a pattern keeps appearing. The ones who lasted, the ones we still remember, the ones whose idea, whose words, whose work outlived empires and centuries, and the noise of their own time. They were almost always the quiet ones, not silent out of weakness, not silent out of fear, silent out of knowing. And perhaps the most radical thing you can do in this age of endless noise is to go quiet, to sit with yourself, to build something real in the dark before the world is ready to see it. Because legends don't announce themselves, they simply arrive.